Thank you. So I'm going to start by giving a little bit of introduction about the Office of Undergraduate Research to all of the students who are attending this session. So in order to make it a little bit clear for you, I'm going to start by sharing my screen to show you what we have in the Office of Undergraduate Research, what kind of opportunities we have here, and how we can help you to thrive as an undergraduate student at UMass Dartmouth. So the link is in the chat box if you're interested to know more. We have internal funding opportunities, external resources, presentation opportunities, as well as all kinds of guidance that you need in order to conduct your research during your time here at UMass Dartmouth. The discussion that we have today is mostly related to the internal funding opportunities because, as you know, December 6th is the deadline for our internal grant winter and spring cycle. And if you go here to this page, you can find all kind of information about these seasonal grants that the Office of Undergraduate Research offers to its own students, undergraduate students. There are PDF files, including the application that you need to download and fill out in order to submit it on December 6th. Of course, you need to discuss everything with your advisors, with your supervisor for this research grant project before you do anything. But you can gather a lot of information via our website. In case you don't know what doing a research means, I highly encourage you to check out this OUR work blog page. It features the research story of most of our undergraduate students at UMass Dartmouth. So even though these are not the original grant application proposals that they submitted, you can get an idea about what it means to do research, for example, in biology or in biochemistry or in economics or engineering, as well as fine arts. So, there are examples of every discipline that you can think of here at UMass Dartmouth in which students have done research. So we have examples of students in the fine arts from the CDPA, students in the humanities and social sciences from the College of Liberal Arts, and we also have examples of students in STEM. So I highly encourage you to take a look at these opportunities that we have listed on our website. There are also external resources for you, which means that there are a lot of opportunities out there for presentation and also for getting grants and scholarships that are external to the UMass Dartmouth campus. I will have an information session about these very early in the spring semester, so keep an eye on your emails. We will have a very, very informative information session about these in the spring semester. I'm going to stop sharing the screen here. And again, if you need to access the Office of Undergraduate Research, the best way to start is by clicking on that link, which is featured in the chat box for you. And you can get all kinds of information via our website. So on this note, I'm going to turn the platform to Professor Elizabeth Bach, who's a professor of English, but also the director of the Writing and Multiliteracy Center, to take the platform and to talk to you a little bit about strategies for grant writing. After Professor Bach, Professor Robert Fisher will talk to you about grant writing in the STEM fields. So without further ado, Professor Bach, I'm going to turn the platform to you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. I hope that you're all doing well. I know myself, it has been quite a chaotic semester, given everything that we're navigating at the moment. So I do hope that you all are well, and thank you so much for inviting me to present here today. So I do have a handout. I will go ahead and share the link to this in the chat, but I will also share my screen as well so I can kind of talk everyone through it. But my goal here is to really just give you some general tips for grant writing and also to share some additional resources and talk about how the Writing Center can be of assistance here as well. So let me go ahead and share my screen. All right. Sorry, I know the way that the screen sharing works tends to sometimes condense things. So can everybody see that all right, or at least can follow along in the link? Okay, awesome. So yes, I am Dr. Elizabeth Buck. I am an assistant professor in the English department and also the director of the Writing and Multiliteracy Center. So for those who have maybe never been to the center before, we are located in the Liberal Arts Building, room 221. So if you're crossing over from the campus center, we're basically in that first hallway. So we this semester do have both online and in-person availability. So right now, we're probably going to change this a little bit for next semester, but for right now, from 10 to 5, Monday through Friday is in person, and then from 5 to 9 is online, and weekends are online. So it's always an option if you would like to brainstorm ideas with one of our tutors at the center. If you would like to bring a draft, that would be something we would be happy to talk to you with. The only recommendation I have is that not all of our staff might be as familiar with grant writing as others. So if this is something that you're interested in, please do reach out to me and I can give some recommendations for specific folks to work with. But I do have my email address on there, so please don't hesitate to contact me directly. Okay, so here's some just like really quick things about grant writing. So I have worked with many people on grants in all different disciplines. And so I tried to distill kind of what I think are some of the more essential points that also transfer to many different fields in whatever. So one of the bigger ones, I know I worked with someone on a Truman Fellowship Scholarship, and that was one of like, the highlights of my career really in working in writing centers is when that individual actually got that scholarship. It's a very competitive one. So it was very cool. But the biggest thing really is that you want to be very specific with the grant, with the proposal that you're writing, because you have to assume that your audience could be reading 50,000 of these, maybe for a very big grant. They could be reading that many, a very big grant, but they could certainly be reading, 50, 100 of them. And the ones that stand out are the ones that are the most specific, that really talk about, this is how I will use these funds. This is how I will use this opportunity. And they do so in very specific ways. So really conveying why your research project, why it matters, and how the proposed funding will benefit your work. So being incredibly specific about that. So if they ask you to identify, who will be the audiences, who will be the constituencies that will be impacted by this research, say something like, the student population at UMass Dartmouth in this major are going to be impacted by this research. So, and even if you can go more specific than that, the better. But that's just an example. So they will really be looking for ways that you will be using that money toward that particular purpose. And the other thing that's really important is to follow the directions. I know that seems really simplistic, but they are going to be looking for reasons to just toss out applications. And the easiest way to do that is for someone who doesn't follow the directions. And that can be all the way from, you didn't include all of the required materials. Let's say you have to include a resume or a CV and you forgot to do that. So I often recommend that before you submit your grant, that you actually make a little checklist for yourself and just check off to make sure that you have included all the components of the grant that they are looking for, because that's a really easy way to get rejected, is if you miss something, is if you don't follow the directions. But what they're really going to be looking for, in addition to following the directions and specificity, is, are you articulating your ideas, your project, in a way that is concise? Are you articulating them in a way that is clear? And are you creative and original in bringing those ideas together? So are you proposing something that no one else has done before? So I often recommend, that one of the most helpful things that you can do, just to get kind of a sense of the genre, is start looking at other grant proposals in your field. Start looking at them from people who have gotten big grants, because they are pretty accessible if you just Google them in your field, and because it is a genre, it has particular requirements, but reading a bunch of them before you start writing your own can be really, really helpful to kind of see how they articulate those things. But that is going to be a big thing, is like, are you bringing something new to the table? Are you doing something that's different that someone, if you are going to take someone else's idea and kind of springboard off of it, are you clear in the ways that you're going to do that? So grants too will often involve citing sources and thinking about the ways that you are expanding those research questions in ways that others have navigated those questions. So I think we often talk about it like, how are you filling in the gap? How are you navigating that gap can be a really big thing too. So really being specific about, oh, this person talks about this person talks about this. I'm synthesizing those ideas and bringing them together and doing something new out of it. So this is very much a research-based genre too. So I also think when it comes time to reading your grant, that it's good to think about kind of 4 audiences. And if you can locate people in these different audiences, that's going to be a good thing to do. So the first audience is really someone who is an expert in your own field of study. So perhaps a professor, a mentor, and they're going to be very well positioned to speak to how it aligns with what the field is doing, what individuals have already said about this. So that's a really good and important audience to have. The second audience is a professor or skilled reader, perhaps outside of your field of study, because you don't know who's going to be on the grant committee. It could be someone who knows nothing about your particular field. So to have an expert reader who is not in your discipline, they can point out the ways that maybe something is not making sense or the dots aren't being connected because they're not an expert in your field. The third audience is just to have a peer, someone who knows something about what you're talking about. That's a really helpful audience too. They can give really helpful feedback. And the fourth reader is someone who knows absolutely nothing about your content. They can be a really, really valuable audience. Again, kind of in the same way that a professor or skilled reader outside of your field of study can be a helpful audience, but to just say like, hey, so if that's like, a parent, a friend who's not in your major, because they really can say like, okay, this is the parts of this that's not making sense to me. Because again, you just don't know who will be on that committee. They could be someone who, has no background in the area that you're exploring. And so having a reader who is not familiar with it can help point out again where those things might not be making sense. So as I mentioned previously, some of the things that are really, really helpful is reading examples, reading successful examples of the grant or scholarship that you are applying to, really getting a sense of breaking them down and saying like, okay, what did they do that made this successful? And I bet you'll start seeing things like, oh, they were really specific. Sometimes too, if you have to follow a particular template, it can be really helpful to look at an example for that reason. I know when I was writing my dissertation, we had to have like a very specific template and I could not figure it out until I looked at someone who had written one the year before and I was like, oh, I get it now, because it was about the paginations. So yes, I can't emphasize enough how just useful it is to try to get access to examples. So the resources that I have for you there are, of course, the Writing and Multiliteracy Center. I'm happy to recommend some folks who, if you want to take your proposal to the center, to either have a skilled reader or someone who might know nothing about your grant, that we can definitely help out in terms of those audiences. I too am happy to read over proposals myself and give you some feedback too if you reach out to me. It's always something I'm happy to do. If you email me, I do have a link in my email to Calendly. So if you want to book a meeting with me, I'm happy to talk with you in that way too. The other two links are just the General National Science Foundation strategies for proposal writing. There's some really useful resources there. And then the last link is kind of, it's a course, it's free, but it's also goes through some tips for grant writing too. I think it's pretty helpful. All right, so that's all I have for you, but I think we're going to have some time in the end for questions. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you might have as well. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Buck. We are going to save the questions for the end of this session. So for that reason, I'm going to turn the platform to Professor Robert Fisher now.
Thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Let's see if we can get this up in screen mode. Can everyone see this okay? Does that look good? Okay, excellent. So just to build off of the very informative advice that Professors Karimi and Buck have provided, I just wanted to talk a little bit specifically about applications and proposal writing in the STEM disciplines, which is something I'm familiar with. Here is just a quick sort of overview of timelines that you might be thinking of. OURs right in the middle, that includes the cycle that Professor Karimi was referring to, and there's also, I believe, going to be a spring cycle in that as well. And then there are these other timelines that you can kind of have in the back of your mind. We're in the middle of the school year and we're in the middle of this calendar. And this sort of time frame is kind of consistent from year to year. And let me just go through these as well. These are external opportunities. Perhaps we'll have a chance to have a future session to talk in more depth about. The Super Bowl of fellowships for STEM fields is the National Science Fellowship Graduate Research Fellowship Program. And this applies across a wide range of STEM disciplines. And by wide range, I mean essentially everything that you think of as a science or engineering discipline, including all the traditional sciences, biology and chemistry and physics, but also I should point out the social sciences. So this includes, for instance, psychology or sociology are also covered by this graduate research fellowship program. And that's an outstanding program. We've had students on the campus receive this award in the past, and it's an excellent program. It provides for funding for graduate studies at a very generous level. The Goldwater Scholarship Program is basically, we're in that time frame right now, sort of December to January calendar time frame. This is a limited submission opportunity. A few students on the campus will have the opportunity to submit their applications, and all the applications will be submitted, a couple will be forwarded onward. And that's an excellent opportunity. I think that's one that I think we are competitive for. We haven't really been applying for that as much as we really should be doing. The Council of Undergraduate Research has an event called Posters on the Hill, where I'm not sure if you get to participate in person this year, but in years where it was in person, it was literally you would go a very selective program out of all applicants, a couple hundred students every year of all disciplines would have the opportunity to present on the Hill in Washington, D.C. We've had students who've been selected for that as well. I think this year, that time frame is coming up very close. I think it's December, I just checked, like December 13th, I think is the deadline. That one is coming up very, very soon. I think it's going to be a virtual event probably this year. And the Department of Energy fellowships, those are more like January. And we've had recipients for that as well on the campus. So the campus has been pretty successful, and I feel like we can have much greater success in the future. So let me talk a little bit about the structure of writing a STEM proposal, and this is kind of building off of Professor Buck's excellent advice. The way I like to think of a STEM proposal, it should be kind of like an hourglass, right? And what do I mean by that? I mean, it should start off very, very broadly. It should be so broad in the first part that essentially it's that fourth category that Professor Buck was talking about, the people that may not know anything whatsoever about your discipline can read that first paragraph or two and be absolutely convinced that you're going to be presenting some amazing science that should be funded. And then after that, you're going to sort of narrow it down a little bit and present some information. So for those expert readers, or sort of category 1, 2 readers that Professor Buck was talking about, that they can be convinced that you really know what you're talking about at a very deep level, and you have a practical, realizable strategy to achieve the scientific goals that you're aiming to achieve. And at the end of this, after you've gone through the nitty-gritty details, you kind of broaden out and you can give your sort of assessment of what your impact will be upon the field should you be successful in receiving this award, right? And let me show you a specific example. I have an example here. Let me do another screen share of a proposal that was written by a student. This is a former student of mine who wrote an NSF GRFP. Can everyone see this okay, this text? Okay, excellent. And this kind of shows this kind of hourglass structure, right? The beginning part of this is a very, very broad beginning. It's sort of talking about stars and the importance of star formation and the broad physical structure of why star formation is important. And in the middle, it sort of starts to get into some more nitty-gritty details. There are references to the literature, which is especially for the more competitive programs, that's important because it kind of shows that you're familiar with what's going on in the field. And then there's a structure here as well, where after we kind of talk about the introduction, there is, in this case, a hypothesis. What are you actually trying to show? The methods that you're going to use to test the hypothesis, some anticipated findings and expected significance. And because this was for the National Science Foundation Graduate Research Fellowship Program, the GRFP, a critical piece of that proposal is always what's called the broader impacts, which is a very complicated and often misconceived notion, because it really, even the idea of what broader impact really is, it is kind of a societal impact. And a lot of folks, even faculty members, are confused by this. And I think it's really challenging sometimes to get a grasp of that as a student. But that kind of shows this structure, right? That you should have, I feel like that makes a really good proposal, right? And it's that first part is probably the most important part. Like even I read a lot of proposals from faculty on panels, and sometimes that first part where you're trying to make the case that this is really an important problem to be working on, other people are just not convinced, right? If you're not convinced that's not a great idea, that's not a great thing to be working on, everything else really doesn't matter. So that it's sort of the first page usually of a longer proposal is usually sink or swim. For a shorter structure proposal like this, 1 or 2 pages, that's the first paragraph or two. It's sort of like, if the audience is not convinced by the first paragraph, it's game over, right? You really got to convince them early on that you're doing great stuff. And let me just close with a couple of final kind of sort of take-home comments that I had here. Sort of some take-home points here. The first one, which I feel is kind of important, is that sometimes it can feel like, these programs can be competitive, but you miss every shot you don't take. If you don't take the shot, there's no chance you're going to win. So it's really important to sort of get yourself out there, to be willing to take the shot, and you'd be surprised how often you'll be successful once you take the shots. But along with that, I do have to say, you have to fail sometimes to succeed. And I can give you a personal anecdote here. So when I was an undergraduate, I applied for the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program. First time, I didn't get it, okay? I applied again, my first year of graduate school. I didn't get it then. And actually, that was the most you could apply for the National Science Graduate Research Fellowship Program, right? But I didn't take that as the end. There was another fellowship program offered by NASA, and I applied to it. And I didn't get that either the next year, right? So that was not the third time's the charm. I applied again, right? That would be my 4th time in applying for a fellowship, and I got it the 4th time. And so sometimes you have to fail to succeed, right? And for numerous reasons. Not only is it that you have to keep on taking the shots to get a chance, but you learn every time that you fail. And you get feedback, especially from some of the programs we're talking about that are really, really vital, that help you build a stronger proposal. and your chances the next go around are a lot better. And the last take-home point is just to jump in and get some research experience. There's no time like the present. OUR is a great resource, and you'll have the opportunity to work with some great folks on the campus to really build your resume. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Fisher. I really appreciate that. So to conclude what Professor Buck and Professor Fisher offered to us, I just want to add a few more points for all of you to remind you of what was said, also for some of you who joined us a little late. So Professor Buck kindly gave you information from the Writing and Multiliteracy Center, and I highly encourage you to take advantage of that. Writing is very important. Writing grant proposals, as she beautifully put it, is a genre. So you need to learn how to write your ideas. Sometimes people have the best ideas in the world, but if they cannot express those ideas via writing or speaking, then it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter that you have the most beautiful ideas in the world. Professor Fisher also alluded to some of these important points about writing, and also a couple of important points that was brought up by Professor Fisher is the importance of the first portion of your grant proposal. Please remember that people who review your applications, even though they are absolutely amazing people, and even for our internal funding, for your information, I do not review your applications by myself. 2 different faculty members actually review your application. So these faculty members are research active faculty members. They're extremely busy and they're tired. So, if you just, write a boring first paragraph, you are going to lose their attention. So I highly encourage you to work really hard on the first part of your grant proposal, making sure that you attract the attention of the faculty or the reviewer who's looking at your grant proposal. The other point that I think we did not address properly, and I would like to invite you, Professor Bach and Professor Fisher, to perhaps provide some comments on budget, how to write a budget that doesn't sound like something that is impossible or overtly exaggerated. What is the best way to approach the budget?
Professor Buck, I didn't know if you'd like to get started, or shall I?
Please go ahead.
So yes, so for the budget, I think the important point is, especially like for an OUR internal award, to know what the allowed portions of the budget and what's not allowed. If you have any questions, I encourage folks to to discuss that with Professor Karimi, and to understand exactly what it would take to achieve your goals. So you're going to have your proposal. You're going to understand the dollar amount, that's kind of the range of the maximum value and what's allowed, and then think really carefully. Okay, if I'm going to answer this question or make progress on answering this question, what is it going to take? What is it really a practical thing that is going to achieve that? And that's a little bit of a balancing act, obviously, right? Because you could ask for, sky's the limit, right? And you kind of maybe start teetering over into the extremely, expensive and unallowed region, right? Or you could try to, really kind of make a very, very modest request that's so small that is not really going to suffice to answer your question. So I feel usually when it comes to budgets, it usually comes down to a fine, very fine sense of what it will take to achieve what you want to achieve, and it's nonetheless realizable within the constraints of the program.
Yes, I completely agree. And I think that often when I have reviewed grants is the section I look at. After that first paragraph, that's what I look at first, is to look at, does this seem both like a realistic way to utilize these funds and something that they really need these funds? Because I've seen some grant proposals where it's like, oh, well, is that really necessary? So I think there's sometimes a temptation to want to like write in, things that you don't have a full sense of, how you will be utilizing that resource. And it can be difficult, I think, not to do that, but it is hugely important that you're, again, really specific with how you will be allocating those different funding opportunities, and to make sure, as Professor Fisher said, that you're only doing things that are allowed, because I know some grants have very specific, like you can't use this grant for transportation, or you can't use this grant for food or something, like if you want to give food to your participants, if you're doing a research study. So yeah, so just making sure that you are, again, as specific as you are with the rest of your grant proposal, that specificity also transfers into how you are allocating those budgetary funds.
Thank you so much, Professor Bach and Professor Fisher. Just to add a little bit more to that, to put it in a nutshell, please do not include anything in your budget that can benefit you for your life. For example, don't ask for expensive computer, because that is something that you can benefit really outside of the area of your grant project. So things like that, or like purchasing a house, or something that might benefit a little bit of your grant activity, but then you will go on to take advantage of that for the period outside of your period of grant activity. So things like that are not allowed, but you're more than welcome to be in touch with me directly if you're not sure about something. And also the best source for that kind of thing is also your advisor. Make sure that you check your budget with your advisor before you submit your proposal, because they know they're the best person in your respective fields, and they know what's grantable and what's not grantable. Now, finally, I just want to add a few words about research while you're an undergraduate student. Why do you need to do research? We are living in a very, very competitive time. And so you might think that, okay, I'm a very good student, I'm all straight A's, and I'm going to be very successful in my life. Unfortunately, that's not enough. That's good, and I congratulate you for that if you are such a student, but that's not enough. By doing research, you can really expand the horizon of your thinking, and also you can make yourself a better candidate for jobs, for graduate school, for external sources and funding after your graduation. So I highly encourage you to think about research, even if you think that it's not necessary and that you're a top student in your class, and so you don't need anything else. I still highly encourage you to think about being active in research. And finally, writing grant proposals is not always a success story. Many of us, including Professor Fisher, Bach, and I myself, we have written so many grant proposals that were rejected. So if you get rejected, please don't get discouraged, because that's part of the whole process. You write 100 and you may end up getting only 2 or 3 of those grant proposals that you write. So don't get discouraged. With every grant proposal that you write, you learn something new and you make progress. You become a little bit more mature in your writing, in your thinking, in your conceptualization. So please don't get discouraged if you don't get the result. Even starting the process is a progress in and of itself. So I highly encourage you to write proposals, even if your first attempt is not successful. So on this note, I'm going to turn the platform to all of you to ask your questions. But in order to make you more comfortable, I'm going to stop recording this session. Okay.